Hello class, we're going to be working with our two photos that I sent you guys either yesterday or today. So what I've done first is I've actually gone ahead and cut off the white borders on my pieces. So I'm right up to the 8 by 10 inches, the 8 by 10 inch grid on my photographs. So what we're going to do next is utilizing the grid that is on these photos. We're going to fold our pieces a couple different ways to kind of see how we can combine these two photos to create a brand new photo that's interesting and dynamic for our drawing for project 2. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to fold this piece and this piece in half long ways, and then I'm going to butt them up together to see what that looks like. Go ahead and folded my left piece in half down the middle, and I've done the same thing on the right hand side here. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my two photos and I'm going to try to butt them up along their middle and kind of see what that looks like as a drawing. So for me, that looks pretty interesting. Of course, the closed mouth and the open mouth are not going to line up perfectly along the bottom there. So that could be something where I say, well, for me, that might be a deal breaker, right? So the good news is we actually have a whole nother half right on the back side of this. So whenever we flip our drawing over, what was on our left is not going to be on our right side, and then what was on our right side is going to be on the left hand side here. So we can repeat the process and see if we like that combination a little bit better. And for me, I think that's definitely a much more interesting composition. So before I go ahead and decide that I want to draw this in particular, this specific composition, I'm going to give myself some options. And I'm going to see what it would look like if I were to fold my pieces now along their kind of their middle edge here. So instead of folding them vertically, I'm going to try to fold them horizontally and then see what those compositions look like. Okay, so now I've folded my pieces both in half along their horizontal middles. And what I'm going to do now, since I have these two foreheads, I kind of want to see what it would look like if I matched the top half of one drawing with the bottom half of the other. Since this composition has the two eyes in it, I kind of want to have a complete eye set here, and then I'm going to see what it looks like if I combine it with the bottom half here. And again, you want to line up our middles and make sure that our edges are lined up. And that's a pretty interesting composition there. So when I'm saying composition, I'm talking about the actual drawing that we could potentially create, or the artwork that we can kind of create with this, right? So for me, that's pretty interesting. We have almost kind of like this third eye that starts to appear here, this shifted eyelid down this way, and then also this kind of funky ear that comes through on the bottom. But on the right hand side here, it looks like the contour of the right side of the face and then the right side of the bottom face are actually lining up pretty well. So that's kind of interesting, and I might want to play with that later on. So let's go ahead and try the opposite, right? So we'll flip this back over, and then what was on the top is not going to be on the bottom, and then we can see what that composition looks like. And it's pretty funny looking, right? Obviously we don't have a complete set of eyes between the top and the bottom, but the proportions of the face change pretty drastically. If we can see that here, you can see the eyes are kind of like scrunched together and really kind of compressed in the face, and the face looks shorter and then angrier, right? So that could be a really interesting composition to play with. So what I want you guys to do is kind of give yourself the option of playing around with these things before deciding what direction you want to go. Once you have decided which direction you want to go, then we're going to use our scissors, and then we're going to cut our pieces along the lines that we want to end up utilizing. So for instance, if I really wanted it to stick with this composition here, I would cut my composition in half this way so that I have my top edge, cut this composition down the middle so that I have my bottom edge. For me, the composition that kind of stood out the most was this, one of the first ones that we did whenever we had folded our pieces long ways. So I'm going to stick with this composition for my final drawing. So what I'm going to do now, like I said before, is take my scissors and I'm going to cut along the middle line where I did my first fold. So I've gone ahead and cut that first piece of paper here, and like I said, I want to use my left hand side. So I'm not gonna throw this away. I'm just gonna set it aside in case I change my mind. And now I want to repeat the process for my other piece. We want to be really careful on that line as closely as possible. We really kind of want to hug that line so that both of our edges are nice and sharp, and they'll end up butting together a little bit more seamlessly, so that whenever we do end up combining these pieces, we don't have any kind of white gaps in the middle. We want these to butt up as close as possible. Once I have all 4 of my pieces, or I guess both of my pieces cut in half, now I have these 4 pieces that I can work with. Like I said, I really liked the way these 2 pieces look together, right? And I really kind of want to pursue that as my drawing, and we've kind of gone through a few different other iterations that we could play with. But while we're here, I think it's a good idea to kind of play around and see what else we can do while we have all these pieces out, right? So one thing that we could do is we can kind of play with the orientation of these things, and if we really like the way some of this stuff looks, we can go a different direction, right? It doesn't always have to be that the halves are kind of perfectly matched with one another. There's a lot of tension in this piece, right? So if we really kind of want to take the abstraction to a different level, we might try something like this. We could also, to a point where we had the 2 top halves of the head, and even if we want to take the abstraction even further at that point, we could even take these 2 top halves and connect these 2 top halves to create this kind of more of like a collage looked photo. And then the same for the bottom, so we have the 2 bottom halves touching. And this piece kind of takes on like a little bit more of like a weird, almost kind of like a horror aesthetic. But we can play with this as much as we want to. Again, at this point, I've already cut everything up into pieces. So try playing with this as much as you can in the folded phase before committing to the cutting. Okay, and once we've finally decided on the composition, the next thing you want to do is combine these 2 pieces using something like a Scotch tape or an invisible tape, something that is transparent. Right now I'm using packing tape. I'm kind of hesitant to use packing tape and recommend that maybe you don't use packing tape just because it's so thick. But this is what I have on hand, so this is what I'm going to use. So I'm going to make sure that my grid is nice and lined up first. Make sure my edges are touching. And then I'm going to piece it together. So now that my piece is completely put together, we can move on to the next step of our process, which is going to be almost like a crossroads. I'm going to give you guys a couple different options in terms of how we're going to translate the information that we have in front of us into our drawing. So check out the next video for those 2 alternatives.